The case of Sheila Labar, a monster with an angelic appearance. Psychological and physical traumas received at an early age can have a very unpredictable effect on adult life. Of course, far from always, they lead to the fact that a person becomes cruel and seeks to hurt others. But sometimes it is the trauma can give rise to a real monster. Criminal psychologist Adrian Raine believes that there are genetic and psychophysical mechanisms that can turn a person into a cold-blooded killer, about which he wrote in detail in his book, Anatomy of Violence. History knows a lot of serial criminals who had a truly hellish childhood, and perhaps to them can be attributed our heroine today, Sheila Labar. This woman had an angelic appearance which she skillfully used, seducing her victims and then brutally murdered them. Despite the fact that the court was able to prove only 2 of her crimes, criminologists are sure that there were many more. And now let's look at this difficult story from the beginning and try to understand whether Sheila Labar was a born monster or became him as a result of the cruelty that she faced in childhood. Who is Sheila Labar? Sheila Labar was born in 1958, the 4th of July, in the small country town of Fort Payne, Alabama. She was the youngest of 3 children of her parents and was raised with her brother and sister Lynn. Her childhood was spent in a picturesque but rather secluded place, on a farm nestled among cornfields. According to the memories of Lynn's older sibling, Sheila was an active, inquisitive, and open-minded girl with a creative streak. She liked to be in the center of attention, had a good voice and cute appearance, so perhaps, if her life had turned out differently, she would have become a famous actress or singer. But instead of bright posters, her name decorated the pages of criminal chronicles. The unimaginable cruelty of her father. The head of the family, Manuel Bailey, for many years suffered from alcohol addiction, although it would be more accurate to say that his addiction suffered from his entire family. He often went on binges, turning into a real beast who enjoyed abusing his wife and children. He insulted and humiliated them, beat them with anything that came to hand, could throw everyone out in the middle of the night in a downpour or frost, and locked himself in the house, not letting anyone inside. Mothers, daughters, and sons often had to spend the night in a barn or in the open air in the field. One day, when Manuel was once again in a drunken rage, he began throwing dishes and other objects at his family members. The mother tried to cover the children as best she could, but one of the flower pots thrown by her husband hit her youngest daughter Sheila in the head. Sheila suffered a serious concussion and a lifelong scar on her temple, which she painstakingly covered with her hair. But not even the insults and beatings were the worst thing that the sisters had to endure in their parents' home. According to the memories of Sheila and Lynn, Manuel from an early age forcibly inclined them to intimacy. The mother may have been aware of what was going on, but the subject was never broached. However, despite the nightmare at home, Sheila did well enough in school. She dreamed of leaving the farm as soon as possible and go to conquer the big city. The girl was quite ambitious and determined. She passionately wanted to realize her childhood dream in life and become an actress or pop singer. And she had everything for this: charisma, bright appearance, and a beautiful voice, adulthood, first marriage. Barely Sheila was 18 years old. She left her parents' home, but adult life was not so joyful. To enter the university, she was not allowed to average score, and to move to the big city, she simply did not have the money. Then Sheila got a job as a maid in one of the hotels, where by that time her older sister was already working. It should be noted that Sheila had a slender figure and a very attractive appearance. She had big blue eyes, a charming smile, and a mop of thick long hair. She was surrounded by attention from men, and over time, she learned to use it and manipulate her suitors. In the late 70s, Labar, then Bailey, met a guy named Jonathan Baxter, and a romantic relationship began between them. Jonathan was not yet 20 years old at the time, but he already had a young daughter from a previous relationship. However, the child did not become a hindrance, and soon the couple got married. However, this marriage lasted only a few months and collapsed after Jonathan learned that the young wife abused his daughter while he disappeared at work. Sheila was frankly annoyed with the child, and she would raise her hand or lock her in a closet if she started crying or acting up. Jonathan did not organize scandals and listen to explanations. He just Strazoot filed for divorce and put his wife with his belongings outside his house. He never wanted to see or hear from her again. After the divorce, Sheila dated various men and mostly lived off them. But all these relationships were fleeting and lasted from a few weeks to a couple of months, until in the early 80s she met her future second husband, Ronnie Jennings. The tumultuous romance soon led to marriage, and Sheila took on a double last name, Bailey Jennings. It was an unhealthy relationship between two irascible and unstable people who regularly cheated on each other, scandalized, and even fought. Still, their marriage lasted more than 3 years. In 1984, after another family quarrel, Sheila demanded a divorce from her husband, but he refused her. In fact, Ronnie did not hold on to the relationship at all. He just wanted to piss off his wife and make her mad, and he succeeded. Sheila became hysterical, took a large number of drugs in front of her husband, drinking strong alcohol, and after this infernal cocktail, sat behind the wheel of the car and rushed down the road. Naturally, soon Sheila, under the influence of pills and alcohol, lost consciousness, flew off the road, and at high speed crashed into a tree. She miraculously survived, but suffered a massive head injury. She spent more than a week in a deep coma, and doctors made no prognosis. When Sheila finally regained consciousness and gradually recovered, she was transferred to a psychiatric hospital where she spent several months. She later complained to her sister that one of the orderlies was constantly harassing her and possibly taking advantage of her helpless state when she was heavily sedated. After all this, Sheila returned to her second husband's home, but began to behave not just aggressively, but threateningly toward him. When during another scandal she attacked Ronnie and poked him in the chest with nail scissors, Ronnie, fearing for his own life and health, filed for divorce and hurriedly moved out of the mad woman. Rich lover. When the second marriage was dissolved, the young woman began looking for lovers through the dating columns of the print media, and she left her ads there as well. But no man did not stay with her for long, because Sheila tended to dominate everything, rigidly suppressing their partners, both in intimate and everyday life. Soon the photo of an attractive girl in the dating section drew the attention of 60-year-old Wilfred Bill Labar. The man had previously been married twice and had adult children and grandchildren from previous marriages. He was widowed a few years ago and had been living alone on his large country ranch ever since. Bill was a fairly wealthy man. He had a chiropractic office in Epping, New Hampshire, and on the ranch he raised horses. At the same time, he was very lonely and needed a strong, powerful woman. In fact, that's exactly what he found. Sheila was attracted by the wealth of her new acquaintance, and she decided that it would be an ideal union for her. And to make Bill completely lost his head, she began to send him a postal mail frank letters, supplementing them with her nude photos. The trap worked, and soon Labar invited a charming pen pal to visit his ranch. Their romance developed rapidly. An elderly man is not stingy on expensive gifts for a young mistress, and in the summer of 1987, she moved to live with him. This has incredibly flattered the doctor, who now went out in public with a beautiful companion who was half his age and was fit for him as a daughter. Nevertheless, he did not plan to marry Sheila. However, Sheila, not waiting for a marriage proposal, changed her name, calling herself Labar. Bill was surprised by this turn of events, but he did not object. Sheila began to interfere in all the affairs of her elderly lover, starting to control his business, finances, and disposition of his property. In addition, Bill was getting older and could not satisfy the intimate needs of a young woman. Then, according to Sheila herself, he allowed her to meet other men, whom she often brought directly to their home. One of Sheila's regular lovers, closer to the mid-90s, was a Jamaican national named Wayne Ennis. He was much younger than Sheila and was initially hired as an au pair on the ranch, but soon the young man, with Bill's consent, which was probably given under pressure from Sheila, moved to live in the owner's house. In 1995, Sheila and Wayne officially legalized their relationship, and the spouse considered that from now on, he would be her only man. But soon he realized that he was wrong, because his wife continued to meet with different men. Wayne was not satisfied with this, and one day he jumped with fists on Sheila and her next lover, causing them bodily harm. Accustomed to being dominated, Sheila for the first time didn't know how to deal with her third husband, who got into a fight every time a rival appeared on the horizon. Eventually, she filed for divorce and sought a court injunction to stop Wayne from approaching her, accusing him of violence and assault. Another divorce did not affect the turbulent personal life of Sheila, who continued to meet with numerous lovers, changing them like gloves. True, now her relationship increasingly often began to end with lawsuits from men who accused Sheila not just in cruelty, but also in the threat to their lives and health. Thus, one of her boyfriends she deliberately hit by a car and almost ran over. Another almost broke his head, and another scratched his face so that he was forever scarred. Sheila, with age, became more and more dangerous to others. From every man she demanded obedience, and in cases of disobedience, fell into a rage. In 2000, at the age of 74, Bill LaBar died of heart failure. Although doctors and police officers did not see a criminal trail in the death of an elderly man, his family members were convinced that Sheila had something to do with it. In their opinion, she had been poisoning Bill little by little for years, and literally drove him into the light. Despite the fact that Bill and Sheila were never officially married, Sheila, according to the will, became the sole heiress of all his property. The relatives tried to challenge this through the courts, but never got anywhere. They are still convinced that the mistress forced Bill to write the will she wanted. House of Temptation. After Bill's death, as I have already mentioned, all his property came under Sheila's complete control. Now she no longer had to consider anyone's opinion. She could do whatever she wanted with the estate she had inherited. She herself called her home a place of seduction and pleasure, where there were no inhibitions. She met men on the streets, in bars, on the internet, lured them to her, and then tried to keep them on the ranch as long as possible. She didn't care about their age, skin color, or any physical appearance. She promised them unearthly pleasure, and then sought to suppress and subjugate them to her will. Sheila regularly tried to seduce couriers by meeting them in the nude and offering an alternative method of payment. But she didn't take into account the fact that she herself was not getting any younger, and was nowhere near as attractive as she used to be. It got to the point where couriers simply refused to come to her address. Neighbors noticed that on the ranch, LaBar, constantly come different men, but some hurried to leave the place the same day. Others were delayed, but also for a short time. What was going on in the house itself could only be guessed at. Where had Michael DeLorge disappeared to? Soon, Sheila decided to look for lovers among men who were in dire need of housing, money, or those men who suffered from addiction. This category was the most vulnerable, and proved to be an easy prey for the cunning woman, who everywhere posed as a widowed millionaire, and talked about her untold wealth, inherited by her. In 2004, LaBar met on one of the city streets homeless man named Michael DeLodge. He was in a difficult life situation and lost literally everything because of addiction to illegal drugs. His relatives tried to send him to a rehabilitation clinic, but he ran away from there and has been loitering ever since. Sheila liked Michael, and she invited him to her, promising shelter, food, and the necessary drugs in exchange for intimacy. Moving to the ranch, the guy was completely dependent on his old mistress. He complied with all her demands, afraid to be on the street again. But Sheila quickly got into the taste, and her desires became more and more sophisticated. She bound, beat, and humiliated Michael, taking pleasure in it. He tried to escape several times, walking dozens of miles and hiding in homeless shelters, but he never decided to go to the police for fear they wouldn't believe him. Meanwhile, Sheila found him each time and brought him back to the ranch. In desperation, he tried to contact his family members and let them know he was in trouble. His loved ones immediately responded to this disturbing news, but it was too late. In October 2005, Michael DeLorge disappeared without a trace. When his family contacted Sheila directly, she stated that she and Michael had broken up. He had left her, and his current whereabouts were unknown to her. Michael did not show up at any of the places he had been to before. No one who knew him had seen him, and there was no way to contact him. Contacting the police was fruitless, and LaBar remained beyond suspicion, trusting Kenny County. Sheila's tales of her exorbitant wealth were greatly exaggerated, and the house and automobile had to be maintained, so she was forced to get a job. Naturally, Sheila chose an occupation to her liking, she became an operator of intimate phone services. Since she had a truly enchanting voice, men fell for the bait and offered to meet her in person. Among such guys was Kenny County, who at the time of their acquaintance was barely 24 years old. The young man was attractive in appearance, very good-natured and open. However, he had a low IQ level, due to which he was very gullible. This was exactly the kind of guy Labar was looking for. Kenny was very close to his mother, on whom he actually depended, but Sheila, with the help of clever manipulations, managed to break this connection and literally lure Kenny to herself. She made him an unforgettable night of love and promised that they would be like this all the time. The young man decided that he had met the woman of his dreams, about which he informed his relatives, and then moved to live in Sheila's house. But soon Sheila showed the guy her true face, having arranged for him a real torture room in one of the rooms. Each time, intimacy inevitably turned into a brutal beating or something worse. Kenny's body was covered with bruises, abrasions, scratches, cuts, and burn marks. But he could not leave the house of the mistress who had completely subjugated his will. Sheila did not allow him to see and communicate with his loved ones, and his family could only guess what was happening to Kenny. The first alarm was raised by neighbors who periodically noticed the guy and were horrified by his sickly appearance. A few days before his disappearance, a local store clerk took a picture of the young man on her cell phone camera, and later this picture was attached to the case file in court. In the photo, Kenny's condition could be described as deplorable. He was very thin, there were huge bruises under his eye and on his cheek, and his nose was probably broken. Judging by the degree of healing, all these injuries had been inflicted at different times, which suggested that the guy had been brutally beaten for a long time. The contents of his cart were also alarming. He rolled 2 large canisters of fuel to the cash register, as it later turned out, for his own cremation. The store employees were so puzzled and even frightened by the guy's appearance that they decided to report him to the police for possible domestic violence. But this time, Sheila managed to get away with it, and they could not charge her with anything. Soon Kenny stopped contacting his family altogether, and when his worried mother arrived at Labar's house, the owner behaved aggressively and advised to leave Kenny alone. All subsequent attempts ended similarly, at which point Kenny County's family filed a missing persons report with the police, indicating that he may be being held forcibly at the country ranch, a home crematorium, and gruesome findings. When police arrived at Sheila's home, she claimed that the young man no longer lived with her, and claimed that Kenny had run away because his mother, whom he was allegedly terrified of, began visiting them frequently. As evidence, Sheila provided an audio recording in which she asks her lover if his own mother had attacked him, and he quietly gives an affirmative answer. It all seemed more than strange, and the very next day, an officer visiting Sheila secured a search warrant for the estate. Sheila had been on the police's radar many times before, and her name had been linked to another mysterious disappearance of a boyfriend. But over the years, Sheila had never been questioned, and her house and grounds had never been searched. When the police arrived, they did not find Labar at home, but they did see several fires burning near the outbuildings. The fires looked strange and were made of improvised materials, a mattress, fragments of wooden furniture, hay, etc., all doused with a flammable mixture. One of the bonfires had bones in it that clearly looked like human remains. The squad requested reinforcements in the form of forensic experts, reporting all the findings. But that turned out to be just the tip of the iceberg compared to what they discovered next. Almost all over the house were found poorly washed traces of blood. It was so much that it seemed as if there had been a real massacre. It turned out that the blood belonged to at least 3 different people. The bones smoldering in the fire belonged to the missing Kenny, and there were 2 empty fuel cans lying nearby, the same ones the boy had bought at the local store the day before. But that wasn't all. Also found on the property were the remains of Michael Delage, who had disappeared a few years earlier, and some fingers of some third guy who was never identified. Among other things, a large number of items belonging, judging by the size, to various men were fished out of the sump at the ranch, the fates of which have not been learned. The hostess herself was not at home at the time of the police visit. She had figured it out and gone on the run. Sheila hitchhiked to Boston, where she obviously hoped to get lost. Moreover, on the way, she seduced one of the drivers who gave her a ride, and he trustingly invited her to live in his house. However, the next day, having seen on TV news about the search for a dangerous criminal, the new lover himself called the police and reported that Sheila is now in his bed. It was there that she was arrested. During the search of Sheila's home, another frightening find was made: a box of videotapes. On the tapes, Kenny Michael and several other men confessed to horrific crimes, but judging by the guy's appearance and condition, they made these confessions under torture. Since Labar's arrest, her mental health has raised a lot of questions, so the court ordered the necessary evaluations. Sheila was found to have a delusional disorder, as well as signs of schizophrenia. She called herself an angel sent from heaven to protect children from rapists. It was Sheila's failing mental health that became the basis on which her attorney tried to build a defense. He called his client a profoundly sick person and tried to prove that she was not aware of her actions. The reason for this was the mental and physical trauma she had suffered as a child. The defendant herself claimed that many years ago, when she was in that terrible accident and found herself in a coma on the verge of death, she met with God, and the latter told her to cleanse the world of men who infringe on children. Sheila's ex-husbands and some of Sheila's lovers also spoke in court, who, in one voice, called her a crazy, unstable, and extremely violent woman. And Wayne Ennis, the third husband, said that the ex-wife repeatedly persuaded him to kill Mr. Labar in order to seize his property. But despite the defense's attempts to convince the court that Sheila was insane and in need of treatment, it was proven that she was aware of her actions at the time of her crimes. She was found guilty in July 2008 and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of ever being released. All of her appeals were rejected. Sheila is now serving her sentence in Florida at Homestead Correctional Facility. Corpus Christi resident Kevin Davis strangled his mother before hitting her in the head with a hammer, splitting her skull. Davis then swirled her brain around before sexually assaulting her corpse. Davis was sentenced to life in prison for the crime of a mom who he described as the best. In 2014, Kevin Jazrell Davis argued with his mother, 50-year-old Kimberly Hill, in the Corpus Christi TX apartment he shared with her and his sister, Destiny. On May 26th, Davis called 911, reporting that he'd just murdered his mother. Once at the police station, an 18-year-old Davis vividly detailed the day's events, sometimes with a smirk on his face. What he told detectives was gruesome and shocking. Kevin admitted bashing in Hill's head with a hammer, swirling her brain around, and then sexually assaulting her corpse. On the morning of March 27, 2014, Davis, bored and frustrated with life, told his mother he did not like people and that he wanted to commit suicide. Obviously caught off guard by the statement, Hill allegedly told her son that she could not stop him if that was what he wanted to do. Kevin later told police hearing this from his mother enraged him. It was then he decided to take her life. As Hill sat on the couch in the living room, Davis came up behind her, attempting to strangle her with a cord. Hill began screaming. Kevin panicked, retrieved a hammer, and began bashing in his mother's skull. Davis struck his mother in the head with the hammer at least 20 times, splitting her skull in the process. Davis then retrieved a kitchen knife that he inserted inside his mother's head wound. He swirled her brain around to make sure she was dead, Kevin claimed, and then inserted his hand inside the wound. He would tell detectives during a taped interrogation that his mother's brain felt like putty. Kevin then dragged his mother's lifeless body to her bedroom and raped her corpse. When he finished the sadistic act, he went to a neighbor's house, saying he just killed someone and needed help. The neighbor dialed 911. Police arrested Davis without incident. At the police station, he made a full confession of the crime, giving details that even seasoned detectives found highly disturbing. Watch part of Kevin Davis's confession. During the interrogation, Davis told detectives that he originally planned on killing his sister, too, but changed his mind. He further admitted that he often fantasized about having sex with dead bodies. With a smirk on his face, Kevin also told the detective that he was a virgin before he raped his mother. He stated, "I guess I've lost my virginity to a corpse," as he gently laughed. What did Kimberly Hill do to warrant such a violent death? Nothing more in his son murdering than sexually assaulting his mother, of course, and Kevin could not give detectives one good reason for the crime. According to Kevin, she was a great mom that did not deserve what he had done to her. He said that she was the best mother in the world, and went on to say, "I am a terrible, disgusting person." Kevin admitted that he had the best mother in the world, telling detectives that she did nothing to deserve what was done to her. He went on to say that he was a terrible, disgusting person. In reality, Kevin was a serial killer in the making, a psychopath who took sadistic pleasure in hurting other people. Although diagnosed by a psychologist with antisocial personality disorder, the doctor said he knew right from wrong when he brutally murdered and raped his mother. He readily admitted that he would kill again if ever released from prison. He also confessed to then fleeing the crime scene on his bicycle. Before he did that, though, he left several handwritten notes for the police, one of which read, "Chase me. Sorry for the mess. KD." But after a while, he decided against leaving town and called 911 to report his mother's killing and his crimes. Despite admitting to the murder and making a videotaped confession, Kevin Davis pleaded not guilty to the charges in court. He later changed the plea. Davis smiled at the jury as they sentenced him to life in prison. He serves his time at the Jester 4 facility in Richmond, Texas, and is eligible for parole in March 2044. Story number 2. Story of the Killer Priest. We will be exploring the story of a killer. A priest that seemed to be normal, nothing strange or nothing weird about him. However, he did have a dark side. It turns out that not only was he a pervert, but he was manipulating people as he saw fit, especially women. And now, without further ado, let's dive into the story of Gore. We're going back in time in the 50s in France, and we need to take note that the church at that time had a very important place in people's lives. Especially in the countryside, the priests were almost as important as the mayors because they were representing a type of moral authority that many people listened to. And this was the case in the small village of Europe where this story took place. A town that had about 400 villagers, Gore was born on the countryside, and his family was very Catholic. They raised him so that he can have a career in religion as a priest, and even if that was not his first choice, that is exactly what he became. It is in 1950 that Guy became a priest at the Church of Europe. In appearance, this young man looked like the ideal priest. He was nice, friendly, kind, and very dynamic. Anything linked to religion, he did it very, very well. He had a lot of great ideas to help the village grow. He created a choir, a group to play in a theater piece. He did organize multiple excursions for the kids, and he was known to have created a soccer team for the boys of the village. The older people thought that it was very modern for him to bring all these items to the village, and the younger generation thought it was pretty amazing and appreciated the modern aspect that he brought to the town and to the religion. Dewar was apparently also a beautiful man, and the ladies found him very charming. Now, as I have mentioned at the beginning, underneath this whole angelic disguise guy was actually hiding a dark secret. His personality, he had a thirst for kollel pleasure, and he was using his charm to get closer to the ladies. After a lot of perversity and manipulation, a lot of the women actually gave in, and none of the women spoke as they were afraid that no one would believe them and did not want to be seen as the shame of the village. It is in 1953 that things took a different turn for Guy Dyer, and an incident happened that changed the plan of the priest. A girl fell for his charm, and guess what happened? She became pregnant. Now, of course, the priest denies everything, and he says that he is not the father. He threatens the girl and says that if she does not stop, he will file a complaint for defamation. Now, having an eye influence in the village, Guy says that this is nonsense, and it is impossible for him to be the father. And of course, having such an high influence, his followers believed him. He was even summoned in front of his superior, the bishop, to which he lied to you and denied the whole thing. And of course, this whole situation was shut down in reality. He was actually the father, and he actually took the girl to another village to give birth, where he convinced her to give away the child. And of course, that story was never heard of or told to the villagers, or we could say maybe presume that if people knew, they decided not to say anything, because the priests had such a high influence on the villagers that they did not want to go against him. Once the story died, Guy went back to his normal ways and kept manipulating the people like he did before. But there was another incident in 1956. Reen Faze, 19 years of age, got pregnant, and again by Guy Dyer. Contrary to the other women, Reen did not want to give away her child for adoption. Not only that, but she wanted to raise him in the village of the Uref, where the priest Guy was terrified, and he was afraid that eventually the child would grow up and resemble him. He was also afraid that this woman would actually speak. Eventually, speaking of which, in 1956, rumors started to make surface. A lot of parishioners were becoming pregnant in mysterious ways, and no one knew who the father was. The priest then starts to think about a plan and ask a military man from another village to come to town and pretend that he was the father. Unfortunately, that strategy did not work out, and no one believed the soldier was the father. That only made things worse for the mysterious pregnancies. December 3rd, 1956 is a date that changed everything, for the priest Kai brings Rain in on a deserted road to try and convince her one more time to give up the child. She refuses again, and she was tired of the priest's request. So you know what she did. She got out of the car and started to walk back the opposite way back to the village. At night, Guy Dyer got out of the car and pulled out a 6.135 caliber pistol and fired 3 shots. The 3 shot hit Regine in the back of the neck, and she died on the spot. Once the crime committed, the priest walked to the victim, undressed her, and took out a knife and started to open Regine's stomach. From her stomach, he removed the baby girl that was still alive. The priest committed again an act that cannot be forgiven. He strangled the baby, stabbed it, disfigured it, and he did all the thinking to himself that, if the baby is massacred that way, there would be no DNA, if you want to call it that way, no DNA to trace the baby back to him. The disappearance of Regine was actually reported in the evening, and the weird part is that the priest joined the search party to find Regine. Can you imagine that situation? I mean, the killer is with you in the search party trying to find the person that he just murdered. Is it just me, or that is just like Twisted? The body was found very quickly, and because the priest was not an assassin, he didn't, think about cleaning up the crime scene, so it didn't take long for the cops to find the murder weapon, and they found the weapon casing that linked back to the priest. So the priest is now a suspect, and when asked during the interrogation, the priest denied everything. However, because of all the pressure he was getting, he just cracked and admitted everything. Now that story came out, and everyone was devastated in France because he is now a criminal, and the church asked for Guy to be locked up with a false name so that it would not affect the church, and also the main reason was to make sure that the crime was not associated to the church. The court addressed the case of Guy Desnoyers on January 24, 1958. Of course, the villagers and the public opinion wanted the priest to be sentenced to death. The life of Guy was defined as a person that did enjoy luxury, sexual relations, and admired his own authority. And on his side, the priest was asking forgiveness because he had no clue what he did wrong. The jury did provide their verdict, and for most, they said that he was guilty of double murder. Of course, there was Regine and the baby. However, they did not want to sentence him to death. The jury did not want to send someone associated to the church to the scaffold. The priest Guy Desnoyers was therefore sentenced to perpetrated work. Now that situation raised a lot of questions regarding the responsibility of the Catholic Church, and this is still a question that is being asked nowadays, especially for the priests who like other kids, if you know what I mean. There was an investigation that was done, and the report came up saying that the church knew the dark side that he was hiding before he was pronounced priest. His superiors noticed that he did not have a lot of faith, and he was not really a believer in Catholic religion. The investigation did show that before being priest in a Uref, he was sent to Blemont. While he was there, he did have a sexual relation with his parishioner, and instead of removing his status, they just transferred him to another city. Even there, his weakness for women did not stop, as he did have multiple sexual relations. You would think that the church would revoke his status, but instead he was just transferred to Europe, where the church was isolated and his temptations might be lower. But as we have seen, this was not the case. Desnoyers was released in 1972 after being detained for 22 years. He was the oldest prisoner of France. Once again, the church came to his help after he was released from prison. He was welcome in a monastery in Brittany, where he stayed there until he died on April 21st, 2010 at 90 years of age. Now we go to story number 3. Family slaughtered at Wellscrape Provincial Park. The killer stalked the family while he let his violent fantasies run wild. 3 generations of a family left to go camping on August 2nd, 1982. They set up camp in the Wellscrape Provincial Park, located roughly 120 kilometers north of Kamloops in central British Columbia. They enjoyed several days of cloudy family time, picking berries during the day and gathering around the fire at night, having no idea that they were being stalked by a killer. Among the campers was grandparents Edith, 59, and George Bentley, aged 66. Their daughter Jackie, 41, and son-in-law Bob Johnson, 44. Also the Johnsons' daughters Janet, 13, and Karen, just 11. The Johnsons drove up with their daughters and pitched a tent for the girls. The grandparents brought a truck and camper where the adults would stay. The last anyone heard from the family was on August 6th, when Edith called another daughter. It would not be until August 23rd that the family would first be reported missing. Bob Johnson was due back at work on August 16th, but didn't show. After a week with no word from him, his company filed a missing persons case with the police. In spite of an extensive search, it didn't result in finding any of the family members. The biggest problems were the killer had a head start. With plenty of time to kill, get rid of the victims' bodies, and cover his tracks. The other, maybe even bigger obstacle was, no one knew exactly where the family was camping at. All anyone knew was that the family was camping in the Wellscrape area, which is massive. They had no idea where to even start, let alone being able to follow a trail to find the family. It would take 3 more weeks and a mushroom picker to find the family. On September 13th, the current discovery of the Johnsons' 1979 Plymouth was found. It had been burned beyond recognition as it set off to the side of a mountainside logging road. The car held the bodies of the 4 adults in the back seat and the 2 young girls in the trunk. The bodies were burned so thoroughly that when it came time to bury the family, they were all placed together in one child-sized casket. Through a forensic examination of the remains, it was determined they had been shot with a .22 caliber firearm. Locals were able to tell investigators where they had seen the family camped at. An examination of the area would turn up .22 casings, which helped identify the weapon used as a Remington pump-action rifle. What wasn't at the campsite was the truck and camper, the boat, and camping gear brought with the family, or any trace of the family at all. With no suspect in custody or even in sight, the media was pushing for answers. A tip came in that the family's truck and camper had been spotted. The witnesses said it was being driven by 2 French Canadians in central Canada. The media sprang into action, throwing this up as their headline and demanding the killers to be caught. In April, with still no leads, the investigators knew they needed to get creative. They reenacted what they believed was the crime scene for TV cameras and aired it across Canada. The next month, the police drove a replica Ford camper truck to Ontario and Quebec, in an attempt to draw awareness for what people should be looking out for. What it did instead was flood the investigators with over 13,000 tips and sightings of the replica vehicle. The reward was raised from $7,500 to $10,000 for information leading to the truck. None of the tips led to the discovery of the camper and truck. It would be found by sheer luck. 2 forestry employees were working on a logging road and stumbled across it. The camper had sat there on Trophy Mountain for 14 months, only a few kilometers away from the crime scene. The camper was burned out like the car holding the family's bodies. This left the authorities to believe they were looking for someone local to the Wells Gray area, and not two French Canadians as they had been searching for, since it was more likely that a local would know about the logging roads and the area in general. Taking a closer look at the person who lived closest to the crime scene led them back to David William Shearing, 24. They had received a tip about him earlier in the investigation. When they followed up, the tipster had quite a bit to tell them. A year earlier, Shearing had asked him about re-registering a Ford truck and how to repair a hole in its door. This was a tip that the police had never divulged. After finding the truck, it had a bullet hole in the door. After an interrogation by the Royal Canadian Motor Police, Shearing confessed. He went so far as reenacting the murders for the detectives. He turned over evidence that he had stolen from the family and the murder weapon, the .22 caliber Remington rifle. The ballistic test would prove that this was the weapon used to kill the family. The same weapon that had been hanging on his wall the very first time the authorities went to ask him about the family, right after they had been reported missing. Maybe it was because his father was a prison guard or his brother was a sheriff. But Shearing wasn't suspected when first interviewed. In his confession, he gave details of how it all happened. He had first noticed the family when he set up camp, fixating on the two young girls. Then over the next few days, he watched their every move. On the night of August 10th, Shearing watched as the adults sat around the campfire and had seen the girls go into their tent for the night. From a distance, he took out the 4 adults with sniper shots. He said he then killed the 2 girls from their tent as they slept. After he said he loaded all the bodies into the car and moved it to the logging road, then set it on fire with 5 gallons of gasoline. He then cleaned up the campground, removing the family's possessions, including the camper and truck. It would only be later that he burned these as he was unable to transfer them into his name. He claimed that he killed the family because he wanted to rob them of their possessions. It wouldn't be until after Shearing was convicted that he gave his full confession of how he had been stalking the family. It was the girls that he fantasized about having sex with that kept him interested. That's why after killing the adults, he kidnapped the girls and took them to his property nearby. There he raped and terrorized them for over a week. On August 16th, the day their father was due back at work, Shearing took Taryn away from her big sister. Once alone, he shot the girl in the back of the head. Janet would be left alive for one more day of torture before she would be killed like her sister. With the girls now dead, he took their bodies to the Johnsons' car where the other family members had been placed. He had actually only hidden the car in some bush. He put the girls in the trunk and got into the driver's seat with the 4 decomposing adult bodies in the back seat, driving it to its final resting place where it would be found by that mushroom picker burned out. David Shearing pled guilty to 6 counts of murder. Shearing was sentenced to life in prison with no eligibility for parole for 25 years, the maximum penalty for second-degree murder. This would be the first time that this sentence was handed out in Canadian history. David Shearing, who changed his last name to his mother's maiden name of Ennis, was first eligible for parole in 2008. The National Parole Board ruled against his release, citing that he was still having violent sexual fantasies and had not completed his sex offender treatment program, so he was not ready to be released. Again in 2012, he was turned down for parole, applying again in 2014, but before his hearing, he withdrew his request. The National Parole Board has also been given a petition which has over 15,000 signatures, advocating for the violent offender to never be released. In his own words at one of his parole hearings, David tries to plead for freedom, saying this about himself: "I was very selfish." He is supported by his wife, that he married while in prison, Heather. Lisa Maria Kaiser was born in 1994 in a large family where her 8 siblings also grew up. It was a large, but far from prosperous family. Parents were busy with their own problems and did not show love and care towards their children. Moreover, there were rumors that abuse and violence were rampant in the family. The story in question unfolded in the year 2020, at the very time when the whole world was consumed with the fight against COVID-19. In one corner of Ecuador, quietly and unnoticed, truly terrible events were unfolding. Here, in the small parish of Pifo, on the northeastern outskirts of Quito, the protagonist of this tragic story was born and raised. Lisa Maria Caiza, a woman with an enigmatic gaze whose life story became a true Ecuadorian nightmare. On that unfortunate Tuesday, October 27, 2020, Lisa sent several messages to the father of her children, David. They were words full of despair, because their paths with David at that time had already almost parted. In these lines, she confessed her love for him and her unexpected new pregnancy. However, in subsequent messages, Lisa wrote that life was losing its meaning for her, and the decision to terminate the pregnancy was inevitable. Throughout the night, Lisa pleaded with David to come to her, but his refusal was resolute. His parents also urged him to stay home, and David took their advice. In the early morning hours of October 28th, neighbors in Lisa's home heard a faint cry for help. Looking out the window, they found a woman lying on the floor with signs of vomiting. The neighbors rushed to help her, immediately calling emergency services. The doctors and police arrived and found Lisa in a critical condition, but still alive. After administering first aid, she was immediately hospitalized. However, in the house, her children, a girl of 5 and a boy of 9, were found unconscious. The doctors were unable to help them. Their little hearts had stopped beating at that point. Authorities learned the identity of the children's father and contacted David Acosta, who, upon learning of the tragedy, immediately arrived on the scene accompanied by his father. He was informed that Lisa was in the hospital and his children were found without signs of life. After several days of fighting for life in the hospital, Lisa finally regained consciousness. By that time, the investigators, guided by their findings, had presented the prosecutor's office with sufficiently convincing arguments to issue an arrest warrant for this mysterious woman. When she was released from the hospital, she was immediately transferred to a social rehabilitation center. The authorities insisted that Lisa undergo a psychological and psychiatric evaluation, as her state of mind required further investigation as part of the upcoming trial. Lisa ended up in a rehabilitation center, and doctors and psychologists took up their work. In a conversation with a criminal psychologist, Lisa opened up about her difficult childhood, where her parents fought and abused each other and their children. Her childhood had a noticeable impact on her state of mind, and moments of quarrels and her parents' divorce became an integral part of her memories. Such a childhood forced Lisa to go to work from the age of 11 to be able to study. The girl strived to escape from her dysfunctional family and build her future in a different way. The expert report also indicated that Lisa had been abused. She talked about how, after several years of marriage, David, her husband, changed dramatically. He began to humiliate his spouse and then to raise his hand against her. On the day of the tragedy with the children, investigators working at the scene found several glasses with liquid residue on the table. These finds later revealed traces of epilepsy pills belonging to one of the children, as well as other chemicals requiring identification. Police officers thoroughly searched the house, and after noticing a strange odor in the kitchen, noticed a suspicious area under the utility room. They broke down the barrier and found a lifeless body wrapped in a blanket, with characteristic signs of having been there for a long time. Later, further investigation revealed that the discovered body belonged to Jaime Yanchaguano, a 28-year-old who had been in contact with Lisa. Jaime had been reported missing by his family days before the gruesome discovery. According to Rosa Yanchaguano, Jaime's sister, he was last seen on October 18th. Rosa told investigators that after her brother disappeared, Lisa called several times inquiring about him. Lisa claimed to have received a text message from Jaime, where he mentioned that illegal substance traffickers were holding him captive and demanding a ransom of $8,000. She strongly warned Jaime's family not to contact the police. This claim became a crucial point in a complex investigation, as detectives sought to solve the tragedy and uncover if there were any other hidden victims. During her interrogation, Lisa revealed that in 2020, while working at a cookie factory, she met Jaime Ian Chiguano. According to her, they became friends. Lisa wanted to return to her husband, who allegedly planned to blackmail Jaime for money. David made it clear to Lisa that if she did not help him, he would divorce her. Later, David gave Lisa a white powder and told her to put it in Jaime's food. Once she did, Jaime fell asleep and never woke up. Realizing what had happened, Lisa, in desperation, tried to win back her husband, but failed. In her despair, she ingested the same poison and gave it to her children. However, the poison did not have the expected effect on her, and she sought help from her neighbors to save herself from the horror that had befallen her children. Following her testimony, investigators launched a thorough investigation, but no evidence of David's involvement was found. No one close to the couple could have foreseen that Lisa Maria and David Acosta's lives would take such a tragic turn. When they met, Lisa was only 16 years old and still in high school, a dreamy and romantic girl, while David was a strong and determined young man. Their friendship quickly developed into strong feelings, leading to Lisa's unexpected pregnancy. Although their families disapproved of their relationship, David's parents supported their son and welcomed Lisa into their home. In difficult times, David's family provided genuine support to the young couple, even inviting Lisa to live with them to ensure she completed high school. When Lisa turned 18, the couple got married. 2 years later, they were expecting their second child, a daughter. David's parents decided to provide the young couple with their own home, giving them an apartment where they found a corner of family happiness. However, over time, their relationship began to deteriorate. Both spouses were unfaithful, leading to mistrust and disappointment. Their once boundless love began to weaken. Lisa also complained of psychological abuse from David, prompting her to seek help from the police. Eventually, she was granted a protective order, forcing David to leave the family home. At this point, Lisa began to blackmail David, demanding money for the chance to see their children. In early September 2020, Lisa's life took an unexpected turn when her eldest son began suffering from seizures. In desperation, she took him to the emergency room at Baca Ortiz Hospital. After stabilizing his condition, doctors conducted tests and diagnosed a focal form of epilepsy, a severe condition affecting a specific part of the brain. Doctors advised Lisa to undergo further tests, including MRIs, and to consult specialists urgently. However, Lisa ignored these recommendations. A month later, her son suffered another seizure, and they returned to the emergency room. Reviewing his medical history, doctors discovered Lisa had not followed their earlier advice, failed to complete tests, and had not seen specialists, leaving her son without necessary treatment. They warned her that continued neglect could lead to legal consequences. Despite the warnings, Lisa disregarded the medical advice. A few weeks later, after her son's condition resurfaced, she called David, who was alarmed by her serious tone. She informed him that a social worker would visit to discuss. To brighten the waiting time, Lisa offered him a drink. However, as David drank the drink, he suddenly felt unwell. His condition was worsening, and the social worker had not shown up. So David decided to go home to get something to deal with his discomfort. The next morning, David woke up in a terrible state. He could barely speak because his tongue was numb. Every step caused discomfort, and his eyes hurt. His parents insisted on calling an ambulance. David was taken to the hospital where he spent several days. Tests revealed the presence of a psychoactive substance in his system, but given that he hadn't used anything of the sort, David began to speculate how this could have happened. Eventually, he speculated that perhaps someone had deliberately slipped him some substance in a public place. David was grateful for his life and realized that what had happened could have ended much worse. In early October 2020, Lisa made the decision to hire a nanny for her children. Her cousin Patricia recommended her friend Bertha, a responsible 48-year-old woman looking for work. On Monday, October 5th, Bertha arrived at the young mother's house. Lissa urged her to take a pill that she said helped prevent infection with the COVID-19 virus, an epidemic of which was at its height at the time. Claiming that it was a highly effective natural remedy, Lissa convinced Bertha to swallow the medicine and enter the house. They sat down to discuss the babysitter's childcare duties. A few minutes later, Bertha began to feel sick. She felt a headache. Her stomach began to upset, and eventually she vomited. A short while later, Patricia showed up. It turned out that she had called her cousin repeatedly, but Lissa didn't answer, which alerted Patricia. She decided to check what had happened and immediately went to her house. Upon entering, she found Bertha lying on the couch, who was practically fainting already. Lissa shared with her cousin what had happened and expressed concern. Learning that Lissa still had not called an ambulance, Patricia immediately did so herself. After a while, doctors arrived and sent Bertha to the hospital. The condition of the victim managed to stabilize. Doctors diagnosed poisoning with a toxic substance, which often happens when using various medications. Doctors decided that Bertha did not tolerate some component of the composition of the pills from COVID-19. A few months before this tragic incident, in June of the same year, Lissa's former buddy, Mark Escanto, had died of poisoning. At the time, the cause of his death had gone unnoticed. But now, given all these strange circumstances, Mark's case required additional attention. Investigators scrutinized the deceased's home and found Lissa's fingerprints on the glasses used the night before Mark's death. This fact added new evidence to the investigation, pointing to Lissa's possible involvement in the incident. But suddenly, a new accusation was made against Lissa. Her own family made a shocking report to the police. It turns out that on September 2nd, the family had a family gathering where Lissa offered to let everyone taste a drink of her own making. 7 brothers and sisters of the young woman, as well as their parents, drank the unknown drink and immediately felt sick. Fortunately, no one died, but the 56-year-old mother suffered a stroke. Lissa's father claimed that while the relatives were seeking medical attention, his daughter stole $1,300 from the house. Now the investigation included not only crimes against the children and a former boyfriend, but also an incident that jeopardized the lives and health of her own family members. As it turned out, that wasn't all. Investigators encountered another strange event. In May of that year, Jose Luis Erazo, a friend of Lissa's, was found dead in his home. A few days before, Jose had suddenly disappeared, and neighbors soon smelled a rotting odor, prompting them to contact the authorities. An examination of the body initially revealed nothing suspicious, and was ruled a heart attack. But one of Jose's sisters suspected something strange and hid a bottle of alcohol found in the refrigerator. In addition, Jose's family noticed that some items were missing from the house. It turned out that Lissa and Jose were friends, and when the guy died, the alleged killer contacted his relatives by phone. With a distraught voice, she stated that Jose owed her a large sum of money, and she had to contact the family to repay the debt. This cunning plan did not work, and a little later Lissa called Jose's family again, changing her voice to conceal her identity. Identifying herself as Jose's friend, she claimed that she was pregnant by him, and now had to apply for child support. Although Jose's family did not believe these stories, Lissa was not about to give up and made a third attempt to deceive them. She said she knew who was responsible for Jose's death and offered to meet to uncover the details. Had she not been arrested on charges of killing her own children in Jaime, the list of victims might have gotten longer. When the media reported the arrest of Lissa, who had poisoned 3 people, Jose's relatives understood. They immediately reported their suspicions to the authorities, and Jose's body was exhumed for forensic examination to determine the true cause of death. The relatives were not mistaken. Traces of poison were found in the remains of the deceased. On December 22, 2020, a hearing was held for Lissa Maria Kaiser for the murder of her 2 children, whose names and photos were classified, and for Jaime Yanchaguano. The trial was conducted virtually due to restrictions related to the spread of the COVID-19 virus. Lissa had been in contact from a social rehabilitation center. The prosecutor's statement said that Lissa gave her children a toxic mixture of insecticides and anti-epileptic drugs. In interrogations, she claimed that she had grown desperate and could not leave her children with her husband David, who did not care for the children. In fact, she admitted that she wished them dead. At the end of the hearing, the judge issued the defendant a court pass and ordered her remanded into custody pending trial. The children's trial next took place in 2021 at the Pichincha Provincial Court. The prosecutor presented a set of evidence to prove Lissa's guilt. Among them were statements by David, who revealed the content of messages the wife had received on the eve of the tragedy. In one of the messages, she claimed that she would take with her what belonged to her, referring to the children. She said she didn't know where her children and herself would go, heaven or hell. But now she felt as if she was in hell. Lissa added that she doesn't expect her husband to forgive her, because she knows he hated her, and now he will hate her even more. David also spoke about his unstable relationship with his wife. At the hearing, the defendant's reconstructed testimony was presented, stating that she took 2 pills that day, called for help, and then passed out. According to the reconstruction conducted by the prosecutor's office, the daughter died while still in bed, and her older brother tried to take a few steps to call for help, but fell and died. The conclusion of the forensic medical examination was extremely clear. The children died as a result of a premeditated crime. The deaths were the result of suffocation caused by pulmonary edema and intoxication caused by a mixture of epilepsy medication and other unspecified substances, presumably insecticides and disinfectant. The prosecution also charged Lissa with the death of Jaime Ianchaguano, whose body was found bricked up in the kitchen. The perpetrator was also suspected of attempting to kill David and members of her own family. The hearing raised the issue of Lissa's irresponsible attitude to her son's health after being diagnosed with localized epilepsy. The mother ignored instructions for further tests and follow-up examinations, and when the boy was hospitalized again, his condition was exacerbated by her own mother's negligence. Warnings from medical professionals did not change her attitude toward her son's treatment, leading to a threatened termination of her parental rights. Lissa's mental health investigations revealed her to be highly emotional and environmentally dependent. She sought constant attention and understanding from others, and experienced severe anxiety when events did not unfold according to her plan. She also exhibited a tendency to self-harm. She attempted to say goodbye to her life at least 3 times, but was unsuccessful each time. Witnesses described her as insecure, attachment-seeking, exhibiting schizoid and erratic behavior. The findings of the psychological analysis also emphasized that on the day of the tragic events, Lissa acted with full awareness of her actions. After a long trial that lasted 10 months, Lisa Maria Kaiser was found guilty of the crime against her children. The Pichincha Provincial Court sentenced her to 34 years and 8 months imprisonment. In addition to this, she was ordered to pay David a compensation of more than $20,000. It was noted in the press that Lissa remained calm throughout the proceedings and only showed emotion when her children were mentioned. The Jaime Ianchaguano murder case, which began in August 2021, appeared to be unfinished. New details were revealed during the court hearings. Lissa admitted giving her friend a white substance mixed with alcohol, but claimed she got it from David. However, the investigation proved otherwise. According to a psychiatrist who interviewed Lissa, she did not want to take Jaime's life. She wanted to intimidate his family so she could then extort money. She did demand $8,000 as ransom. Experts called the plan disorganized, which ultimately led to the crime. In addition, forensic tests revealed that it wasn't that simple. Jaime was found to have poison in his system, and the cause of death was strangulation. The body was found with a shattered ribcage and wire around the neck. Lissa claimed that after her friend died, she decided to bury him under a back room and cement him in. The store owner's testimony confirmed that Lissa bought building materials during the days of Jaime's disappearance. After the parties' arguments, the prosecutor's office requested a new trial in April 2022. At that trial, an additional charge of extortion was filed. Lissa called Jaime's relatives, claiming he was being held by a group of gangsters, and demanded $8,000 for his release. The defense relied on the lack of conclusive evidence that Lissa was involved in Jaime's murder. Nevertheless, she was found guilty and received a 22-year prison sentence as well as a sentence to pay $5,000 to the victim's mother. While Jaime's trial was underway, the investigation of Mark Escanto and Jose Luis Erazo, Lisa's alleged victims, was nearing completion. Mark Escanto was 48 years old, and tests conducted after his death revealed traces of the same substance that Lisa had given to her children. In addition, Mark was found to have severe inflammation of the stomach. The family's lawyer claimed that Lisa met Mark, offered him a beer, and then put the poison in the drink. A glass with Lisa and Mark's fingerprints, as well as a swab containing the woman's DNA, was provided to authorities. Alleged motives for the murder included jealousy and money. It is also known that Lisa had asked Mark to help her financially, and there is evidence that he loaned her at least $120. Mark was Lisa's first known victim. The final outcome of this case, as well as that of Jose Luis Erazo, remain unknown. They may not have been reported in the press, or the investigation may not yet have reached the stage of being formally charged and brought to trial. At the time of her brutal crimes, Lisa Maria was only 26 years old. Her high-profile criminal case has become one of the most horrific and disturbing in Ecuador's recent history. These crimes made her known throughout the country as Doña Venado. Lisa Maria Kaisi is recognized as a serial killer in Ecuador. Her victims have endured terrible suffering, and their relatives have suffered unbearable pain. The charges include 5 murders and 9 attempted murders. Under Ecuadorian law, the maximum sentence she could face is 40 years in prison. That means Lisa could be released when she turns 70 years old. It is still unclear what motivated Doña Venado to commit such horrific acts. Was her act the result of resentment for not getting what she expected in life? Many speculate that the motive was money, and in David's case, Lisa acted out of a lust for revenge, which led to the tragedy with her children. The most horrific part of this story is not only the number of victims left in the path of Doña Venado, but also the fate of 2 innocent children who could not have guessed that their mother, who gave them life, would take it away so absurdly and cruelly. Thanks for watching, guys. Jack was with you. Subscribe to the channel and don't forget to click the bell not to miss new stories from around the world. See you soon. Take care.